Hi and welcome to another video. This video is going to be, I think, the last video that I should do about gear. I will do more videos, but they're going to be more about photography, using gear, taking photographs, editing and so on and so forth. So in this video I'm going to be looking at lots of cameras, lots of lenses, telling you what I use, why I use it, how this compares to that. Not a sort of technical review, more of a ramble, as you'll be used to if you've watched any of my videos. So let me tell you why this is likely to be the last gear video that I do. I started out in 2012-13 with my first wedding. At the time I had a D700 Nikon, which I'd had for about 18 months, 2 years I think. Before that I'd had film for 20 years. And I did this first wedding, and when I actually did that wedding I already had another 2 or 3 booked for 2 or 3 months time, something like that. And from that moment, the moment I did my first wedding, I was of the opinion that I needed to give my clients the very best photos I could. And a part of that, two big parts. One, me learning, getting better at photography, etc. Second part, gear. Because I knew from my experience with film cameras and lenses and so on and so forth, that I knew that gear did matter. And so I kind of embarked on this mission to learn everything I could about gear, to try out and experiment with as much gear as I needed to get the best gear to achieve my aim of giving my clients the best photos. What is best? Best in my view is something that has character, feeling, that isn't necessarily technically perfect, but which gets across the feeling of that couple's wedding day. And so that's why I've been on this gear addiction syndrome, if you want to call it that. But it wasn't really. It was a journey to find what cameras, what lenses that I best liked to give my clients what I wanted to. So as you'll know if you've watched any of my videos, we've been through loads and loads and loads of Nikon cameras, Fuji, Sony. I've used goodness knows how many lenses. So what I'm going to do now is talk about the gear that I've kept, because what I've done, don't tell anyone, I've probably spent well over £40,000 on gear over the last 10 years or so. I haven't got £40,000 worth of gear now, because I bought it, try it, do a few weddings with it. Okay, now move on to the next thing. But along the way, I kept some of that gear because I knew that that was the kind of gear that I wanted. Others I sold because I didn't think it was what I wanted, but then a year, 2 years, 5 years later decided maybe actually I did like that, and so I've bought that again and so on. So the gear I have now, I'm going to talk about 2 types of photography. There's my personal photography, which I don't post a huge amount on Instagram or Facebook or anything else. I do enter a few in competitions. I've got highly commended and gold awards and that sort of thing in the past for some of my photos. But the other thing, of course, is weddings. And weddings, you might think, well, I never do a wedding, so what does that matter to me? Well, don't forget that weddings is about, it's an event. There's portrait photography in there. There's low light photography in there. There's kind of action, maybe not sports, but people are moving around, playing silly games, you know, certainly in the summer out playing on the grass and that sort of thing. But also off-camera flash and that kind of thing. So lots of different aspects all included in a wedding, and therefore part of that might apply to the sort of photography that you do. My my personal kind of work is, I hesitate to call it street, let's call it urban photography, and not landscape, but let's call it outdoor photography. That's what I do for me. So let's talk about weddings first, because that's easiest. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I've been through, started off with the Nikon D700, D600, D750, D800, D850, D780, I had a D5 for a few weeks, and then onto the mirrorless, a Z5, Z6 II. Never had a Z6 because it was such utter rubbish. Sorry if you've got a Z6. Utter rubbish from my point of view as a wedding photographer, maybe not from yours. Z6 II, ZF, what else have I got? Z6 III, I think that's about it. So a pretty wide range of cameras. And then of course I've used Fuji in the past, again just an experiment. X Pro 1, X Pro 2, X100 something or other, TS, I can't remember, not the V, XT5, the latest one, and then Sony A7 III, which I used for an entire year of weddings, and then back to Nikon, and then back to Sony. Second time back to Sony had the Sony A7 Mark IV, yeah, A7 IV, and the A9 II. And then after 6 months, back to Nikon. So it's been a long journey, with a lot of side roads and a lot of detours and cul-de-sacs, and we've come back, and here's where we are. So what I use now for my weddings, well, recently got the Z6 III. I didn't buy it when it first came out. I wanted to see what other people had to say about it, and there were some fairly unkind things said about it, because from my point of view, I see no difference in the images between this and my Z6 II, the D780. They're all kind of really, really very, very similar in terms of images. So the Z6 III, gorgeous camera, AF, which is as good as the Sony cameras I had, which are kind of the benchmark for AF these days on mirrorless cameras. Yeah, love it. I actually love the flippy screen. So yeah, gorgeous camera, and is my main camera at weddings. Next camera for weddings now, and I'll explain why a bit later, is the D780. I think with this I've probably done more shots with this camera than any other camera I've ever used. I think I'm up to about 120,000 shots with this, just with this camera. It's just so easy to use. It just does the job without any fuss. Good in low light, great AF, and it's not until the Z6 III came out that any mirrorless, sorry, not until the Z9, the Z8, and then the Z6 III. It's not until those cameras came out that the AF or mirrorless cameras got better than the D780. As I mentioned, I've had the D5, and okay, it's not as good as a D5, but for weddings, totally capable of doing anything I ever ask of it at weddings. Brilliant camera. And the reason I love it, oh dear, is because, too much stuff, is because, where's it gone? I don't need an adapter. I can just stick my f-mount lenses on the camera, and we have a lovely kind of compact, it just feels so balanced. It's a lovely tool to use for weddings. Once you put the FTC adapter on a mirrorless body, they get a little bit long, a little bit front heavy, not quite so nice to use. So I do love using this. And of course the AF, which for weddings is pretty important, as I say, absolutely brilliant in any sort of light, very low light. It's very happy in low light. Next is obviously, I say obviously, is the ZF. This, I got this, must be 7 or 8 months ago now, and done, I don't know, whatever it is, 20, 25 weddings since then with it. And until I got the Z6 III, this was my main wedding camera, and used it with the FTC adapter and F-mount lenses. And by the way, I have the Z-mount 50 1.4, not the 50 1.8 S lenses. When I had the Z8, I had all 1.8 S lenses, 24, 35, 50 and 85, and I didn't like them. I didn't like the Z8 because its noise in low light was not good. There was a lot of noise in the photos once you got over 6,000 or so ISO. I regularly shoot at 12,000, 25,000 ISO. I have no choice, I have to. And the noise was a real problem. So it didn't take a lot of persuading to get rid of the Z8. Also, I didn't like the Z lenses, the 1.8 S lenses. Far too sharp, far too clinical, far too smartphone look. Don't like it. As I mentioned at the beginning, my look of photos that I want to give to my clients, to my couples, is more film-like, more character, more artful, and they just didn't fit the bill. So I have, apart from that, 50 1.4, which thankfully Nikon have sacrificed some sharpness but got character back in there. It's now a very nice lens. I really like using that if you like images with character. I've also got the, obviously, I say obviously, but the 40 f2, which I don't use much at weddings, but for other events that I might be covering, I've got one Thursday evening. It's a premiere, a film premiere in my local town. I'm covering that. That's a great lens if you want something really small that you can just use with one hand and put it all over the place, stick a flash on it and, you know, hold it above people's heads and just fire away and it will get some shots. It's a good lens. Sorry, I digressed. I was talking about the ZF. I got this because at the time I was shooting with the Z6 II and the D780. The Z6 II, I've still got it, but I very, very rarely use that now because the AF isn't as good even as the D780. And so I got this because the AF in the ZF is pretty much the same as the Z6 III, which is pretty much the same as the Z8, which is pretty much the same as the Z9. So I wanted the AF, and yeah, it's absolutely brilliant AF. It's also brilliant for manual focusing lenses, and I've got a few of those. I've got the 55 1.2 AI. No, actually, I'll come on to this in a minute. This is a pre-AI lens, and that's important for something I'll talk about very shortly. And that is absolutely stunning, beautiful, beautiful lens, which I use on this with the FTC adapter. I've then got this Voigtlander 40mm 1.2 lens. Now this is a Leica fit, but you can see that the adapter you need to put it on the ZF is so small that can't put it on. It's really, really insignificant, and it means I can use it on my Leica M10 and on here as well. And at weddings I do use this lens and this camera. Manual focusing with this camera is so easy that it's actually a practical thing to do at a wedding, for some parts of the wedding. And the images from this lens on this camera beautiful, beautiful images, absolutely gorgeous. Retains the character, but also keeps a very, very nice level of sharpness as well. As to the actual camera, it's not the most ergonomic thing in the world, is it? I did, when I first bought it, I had a newer grip, so it had the thing at the front and the grip at the back as well. I got tired of using that, and I thought, well, if I could just have a thumb rest at the back, then maybe that would work. So I made my own thumb rest. Don't know if you can see that. I bought a very small piece of really, really hard wood, and it really was hard. It's like aluminium. And I crafted my own one, stuck it on the back, so I can now easily use this one-handed, no problems at all, without a grip. And just talking about image quality on the ZF, I'm sure that Nikon, whilst it's allegedly the same sensor as in the D780 and the Z6 II, 24 megapixels, I'm convinced that Nikon have done something with this. Maybe they've changed the color filter array, maybe they've changed the way it processes data from the sensor before it writes it to the card. They've done something, I'm sure they have, because I find the skin tones from this ZF are absolutely to die for. They are a little bit better than the 780 and the Z6 II, I believe. So that's another camera that I'll use at weddings. And the final camera, and you're not going to believe this, and the reason I'm using this camera is because I've done all this buying of gear, trying it, shooting a few weddings with it, so that I can look back. And for this camera, that's what I did. I looked back and I happened to look at some shots from this camera, and I was absolutely blown away. I thought that is absolutely wonderful. And that was with a lens which I'm going back 5 or 6 years now, I didn't have, you know, the gorgeous Nikon 58 1.4 lens, which is my most favourite ever lens. So the camera I'm talking about is a Nikon DF from 2016. And several reasons I love this camera and I use it at weddings. One is the image quality. The colours are just superb. I've got the D700 somewhere. Here we are. The D700. I have used it at weddings. I don't use it anymore for the reason it's bloody heavy. You put a decent sized lens on this and it really does, you do notice it after a few hours how heavy it is. Gorgeous, gorgeous camera, wonderful images, and again it's a legendary sort of camera as far as the image quality goes. I don't actually use that for weddings anymore. I do use it for my personal work sometimes. I've also got, and I'll mention this as well because this is a special camera, you're not going to believe this either, the D200 from I think 2007 or 8. It's a crop sensor 10 megapixel camera. It's when Nikon started making digital cameras with the, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it might have been the D90, or they came out with a D2 very soon afterwards, and they used CCD sensors, not the current CMOS sensors that practically every camera you buy has got a CMOS sensor. These had CCD, which had limitations as far as ISO goes and various other things, but CCD sensors have a certain look. The colours look very film-like. So for Nikon trying to get people to move from film to digital, the D2, which had a CCD sensor, was something to try and get them across to digital. And this, again, they seem to take it a step further than the D2. The colours are totally wonderful. As I say, crop sensor, but again, if you're after image quality, something different to the modern sort of really sharp, super sort of digital look, then the D200, again, I don't use it at weddings, but For personal work, yep, it's absolutely brilliant. So back to the ZF. Couple of things I love about this camera. One, it is so light. It's a lot lighter, I think, than the ZF even. I think it's an all aluminium or magnesium body. It's very small. There's the ZF, there's the DF, almost no difference in size. As I say, it's super light, which after 8 hours at weddings, you will appreciate. Big feature. Let me explain about lenses. If you like old lenses, and I do, because old lenses, and I'm talking the kind of D lenses, so these have got no internal focusing motor, there's a little screwdriver there, the camera's got a motor in, drives a little screwdriver which then does the focusing in the lens. So mirrorless cameras don't do that, of course, so these don't autofocus on any mirrorless camera, you can't do it. So they have to go on a DSLR. Now you can put these type of lenses, and I've got my favourite 105 f2 defocus lens. Gorgeous, best, seriously the best portrait lens Nikon, no, not just Nikon, that I have ever used. And I've used Sigma, Tamron, obviously Nikon. The only lens I haven't had that might be better than that is the 105 1.4 G lens. I haven't had one of those, but I suspect that this is maybe not quite as sharp, but I wouldn't mind betting that this has probably got even more character than that lens. So these D lenses, super character, and very small. I mean, when you put this on the camera, it makes a really small package, and it's very lightweight, lovely to use for 10 hours at a wedding. And if you put this D lens, as I was going to explain, onto, say, the D780. The D780, where's my glasses? Has the aperture feeler thing there. There's a little spring mounted tab sticking out, and when you put a lens on, there's a cutout, and that connects to that tab, and when you put it on, you have to set the aperture ring on this D lens to the smallest aperture, so f22, lock it in place, and then the aperture is controlled by the normal front dial, the same as any sort of G lens would be. You cannot use the aperture ring to actually control the aperture. It has to be done through the camera. However, and if you get one of these guys, a pre-AI manual focus lens, and there's some absolutely wonderful lenses around if you're into manual lenses, and you put that on here without it being modified, you will smash that tab to pieces and you have buggered your camera. So you can't use every lens that Nikon has ever made unless it gets modified. The DF, however, that tab folds up. I don't know if you can see, but there is no tab. Is it folded? Yeah, it's folded up out the way. You can put literally any lens Nikon have ever made on this camera and you won't damage it. However, if you've got one of these, so this one has been modified, so it's much, although it's a pre-AI, it is in fact the same as an AI or an AIS lens. So I can use it on the D780, it doesn't damage it. But if you get one that's unmodified, as I say, it will smash that tab to pieces. So all you need to do on this is flick that tab out. I don't know if you can see that, I've just flicked it out, and you can put this on there and it engages with that tab. But the aperture ring works. You can, I won't be able to show you, I don't think. So you can flick that tab out, that's out, and you can put that D lens, what have I done with it? here it is, on here, and whereas, as I say, you'd have to put that to f22 or f16, whatever it is, lock it and use the front dial to change the aperture. What you can do here is we can unlock the aperture ring, and I can actually use the aperture ring, and as I look through there, can't really show you, but we are controlling the aperture with the aperture ring actually on the lens. If you try and do that with any other DSLR, it will come up with a message EE or something like that. It just will not work. So I love using old D lenses on here. I love the image quality of the camera. I love the image quality of the lenses, and it's gorgeous. So that also comes along, if you can believe it or not, comes along to weddings. Right, for my personal use, well, some months ago, 8-9 months ago, I bought the Leica M10. I actually bought the Leica M9 because that's got a CCD sensor, and I like the look from a CCD sensor. However, the Leica sensors that they used had a corrosion issue, and I bought one M9 that had supposedly had the sensor, it's not the actual sensor, it's the glass in front of the sensor, I think, replaced. However, I got it, took a few shots, and we've got these splodges all over the image, so sent that back. I then got another one, sorry, I then got another M9 where I think the sensor was okay. It had been, no, the sensor had not been replaced, the glass hadn't been replaced. I couldn't actually see any corrosion on it, so that was okay, but unfortunately every 3 or 4 shots the camera jammed and I had to take the battery out, unfreeze it and use it again. So that didn't work out either. So after 2 tries I thought, well, let's go for the M10. So I got the M10, which is a CMOS sensor, 24 megapixels, much better ISO performance than the M9, so it's probably a more suitable camera for most purposes. Love it. It is gorgeous, and with the Voigtlander 40 1.2 lens, stunning images, and again very easy to focus once you've spent the odd 100 or 200 hours playing with the rangefinder, getting used to using that rangefinder focusing system. It takes time, but you can get there, and it's really small. Just, I mean, it will almost literally fit in your pocket, and it's a kind of camera you don't take the camera with you as a camera, you kind of just wear it like you would, you know, a scarf or a pair of gloves. It's just something you just pop it on, walk around with it all day long. So yeah, gorgeous. And I mentioned the Voigtlander 40 1.2. I did have 35 and 50 Summilux lenses and a 40 Voigtlander f2, and I liked the image quality so much from the Voigtlander, even better than the Summilux lenses, that I decided to sell those and just have the 40. I love 40mm focal length. I also use, for my work, the ZF. That's probably my favourite personal use camera. If I'm going out to take photos, I'll take this. If I'm just going out and I might need to take some photos, I'll take the Leica. But to go out and take photos with this, with the ZF, is an absolute joy. The Voigtlander 40 1.2 on that is, as I said before, absolutely stunning, and a really good choice. But of course it is a manual focus. So if I wanted to have AF capability, I would probably pop the 40 f2 Nikon lens on. It's still a pretty small package. The AF is fine. The image quality from the 40 f2 it's not quite as good as the Voigtlander, but it's still a lovely photo. So I think that covers pretty well all of my gear. Why I've got here, how I've got here. Let me talk about a couple of the cameras that I no longer have, just in case you're wondering. I don't have the Nikon D850. I did use that for probably 4 or 5 months. It suffered from more noise than, what was I using? The D780, I think I was using alongside that. It might have been the Z6 II, I can't remember. But it had, like the Z8, a little bit too much noise, more noise than I really wanted. It's quite big, bit bigger than the D780. In fact, it's more kind of D700 size and weight, quite heavy. So for weddings, that was not my favourite camera because of that. Image quality is great. But let me mention something that you might be surprised about. I've mentioned the D200, 10 megapixels. The D850 is, what, 45? Yeah, 45, isn't it? And you're thinking, 10 megapixels? You can't take decent photos with 10 megapixels. They're going to be blurry. When I got the D850, I probably noticed it a little bit with the D800, which was 36 megapixels. But when you take a lens, and let's take the 58 1.4, lenses have a resolving power. They're able to resolve images at a certain level of detail. When you put this, or in fact most of the, I think actually this is the exception, but when you put, say, the 35 1.4 on a D850, its resolving power isn't up to 45 megapixels. So when you put it on there and you take some shots with it and you zoom in and you pixel peep, you will find that the images are not as sharp as if I put it on the D200. You won't believe me, but it's true. And on the 16 megapixel DF, it seems to be the peak of sharpness. So all the f-mount lenses on the DF 16 megapixels are as sharp as they're ever going to get. If you go up in megapixels, you don't get sharper photos unless, and I think the 58 1.4 fits into this category, they are able to resolve 45 megapixels. People automatically assume, oh, I'll buy a D850, I'll get sharper images. You might get actually less sharp images. The Z8, I've mentioned that I didn't like the noise, too much noise, brilliant autofocus and all the other features, but I don't use them. I don't photograph birds in flight. I'm not at the Olympics or anything like that. So no, it wasn't for me. The Sony cameras, which I had for 6 months, the two latest lot, the A7 IV and the A9 II, too clinical. The ergonomics, I really shouldn't criticise the Sony ergonomics sitting here with the Nikon ZF, because the ergonomics on that are way worse than any Sony camera, but it just didn't, I don't know, it just didn't feel nice. The images, as I say, were sterile, clinical, perfectly sharp, reasonably good colours. They're not as good as the Nikon, but I just didn't like it, and I just couldn't get used to that look and that feel. So hence back to Nikon. Fuji. Now, if you ask me, if you said I've got to get rid of all this lot and get one other camera from another manufacturer, that camera would be the Fuji X Pro 2. I did like that camera. I really liked it. It's small, light, does a fantastic job, reasonably good autofocus. The images are lovely, a great selection of lenses. Yeah, lovely camera. Downside, bit of a small viewfinder, crop sensor, so not as good as in low light as these guys. But if that sort of thing doesn't worry you, then certainly the X Pro 2, lovely camera, loved it. When I got the X-T5, fairly recently, only a few months ago, which has gone up to, is that 42 megapixels? I'm not sure. Anyway, I found it to be almost so different to the X Pro 2 that I didn't recognise it as a Fuji. There was so much stuff in the menus. It was so complicated to use. The X Pro 2, when I first got that, I think I picked it up, played with it for maybe an hour, and I could use it with no problems at all. The XT5, I had it for I think 2 weeks and used it quite a lot before I sent it back, and I just never got to grips with it. Too complicated. Maybe I've been using Nikon for too long, but I just couldn't get to grips with it. The images were good, as I say, crop sensor again, lenses obviously the same as the X Pro 2, but no, not for me. Sony, go back to Sony because I forgot to mention the Sony A7C Mark II. Tiny camera, but with a grip, nice, nice to hold. I haven't got it now, and I used that. So that was a 32 megapixel camera, I believe, and I got the Sony 40mm 2.5 G lens, and I have to say that camera and lens combination, from a photographer's point of view, wonderful, because you had the aperture on the lens, you had the focusing ring on the lens. It was also focus, but manual focus. You only had to touch the focus ring, and the camera just instantly went into manual focus mode. No problems at all. So you didn't use the front dial for aperture, you use that for ISO, and the rear dial for speed. So you had the exposure triangle, three things. One, the aperture on the lens, the ISO on the front dial, speed on the back dial. Brilliant, I loved it. Nikon, you still haven't done it. I've nearly got it if I use the Voigtlander, but it's obviously not autofocus because I've got the aperture ring on there. But on the ZF, if I put that on there, I haven't, the front dial, I still have to press the front button to get the dial to be the ISO dial. So it's nearly there, but it's not quite. And this, of course, isn't a Nikon lens. If I take the DF, as I say, I do have the aperture ring on there. I do have the speed on the back. And again, unfortunately, I don't have ISO on the front. ISO on this camera has to be on the dial, and the dials, I don't use the dials much, but they've got a lock button on, and you have to push it down to move it all the time. You can't click it to unlock it and move it. You have to move the blooming button every time. So it really isn't very practical. If I put that sort of lens on, onto the ZF with the adapter, which I've got somewhere, then what you end up with is, again, you can't use, can I show you this? So again, you get that message, lock lens aperture ring at minimum aperture. So we have to go to F22, lock it in place, and it's happy. But then you control the aperture on the front dial the same as you do the DSLRs. It's a pity, but there we go. So, and of course that's only manual focus because it's a D lens. I think I've rambled on for plenty long enough. You get the idea. I've now got the gear I want. I could actually get rid of the D200 and the D700. The D700 I feel one day is actually going to go up in price, so I'm not going to get rid of that. The D200, well, if I sold it I'd probably only get £100 for it, so I just will keep it. And it does have lovely colours, and there are times when that's the most important feature of the photograph I want to go out and get, so that comes in useful. The DF is already a collector's piece. When I got this, probably I think it was about 4 months ago, that was nearly it was a few pounds short of £1,000. It is in brilliant condition. I think it only taken about 400 shots when I got it. and it's boxed and everything else. Not a mark on it anywhere. And it's the silver version, which is a bit more expensive than the black one. But I feel that also one day will be going up in price. But as I say, I actually use that at weddings anyway. So I have really no cameras or lenses other than the Z6 II, which I don't actually use. So whilst, if you've been following me through this journey, I've had a heck of a lot of gear and lots of changes, I've now got to the point where there's really kind of nothing that is going to appeal to me in terms of trying out new things, at least for the next couple of years, if not longer. I can't see Nikon coming out with a new full frame camera in the next couple of years. So there's no reason for me to buy any more gear and try anything else out. Hence why this is going to be my last word on gear. My next video will be on using this stuff to create photographs. Join me for that. Subscribe. Let's talk about it then. Thank you very much for watching, and if you've watched many of my previous videos, thank you for watching those as well. Wish you all the best. Bye.